in Charleston, South Carolina, on a morning so heavy with humidity that even the moss hanging from the oaks seemed to drip. The state capitol building stood like a monument to the past, its stone columns weathered, its steps warm to the touch even before noon. The air tasted of salt from the nearby harbor, and the cries of gulls blended with the hum of news vans lined up along the street. Satellite dishes pointed skyward, waiting. Inside, the old state Senate chamber felt too small for the day ahead. The chandeliers overhead flickered as the air conditioning struggled, the lights reflecting off polished wooden desks that had seen 100 years of debates, deals, and denials. Staffers hurried, clutching folders, fixing microphones, adjusting water glasses that would soon be forgotten in the tension of words. It was supposed to be just another local hearing, another day where men in suits argued over the meaning of voter integrity while ignoring the people who would pay the price. Another day where decisions would be made quietly, away from the cameras, away from the eyes of those who would be silenced by the laws that would follow. But today was different, because Jasmine Crockett was in the room. She had arrived that morning alone, stepping out of a rented black sedan under the watchful eyes of local reporters who did not yet know who she was, only that she was here to speak against the bill Lindsey Graham was backing, a bill he claimed would protect the sanctity of the vote in South Carolina. She wore a dark navy suit, her hair pulled back, her eyes scanning the building's columns with the quiet assessment of someone who understood what they were walking into. Her phone buzzed with messages she did not check, her breathing even, her steps measured as she climbed the warm stone steps, carrying only a single black bag. Inside that bag was a folder, and inside that folder was the reason Lindsey Graham was about to have the worst day of his political career. Graham arrived an hour later, stepping out of a polished black SUV with the confidence of a man who had done this 1,000 times. His staff flanked him, handing him papers, pointing out reporters, reminding him of talking points he would not need. Lindsey Graham had learned long ago that he could control a room with nothing more than a smile and a raised eyebrow, that he could deflect with a joke, distract with a drawl, and disarm with the kind of southern politeness that turned condescension into something almost palatable. At 69, Graham was the image of Washington's survival, perfectly pressed suit, the faint scent of expensive cologne, the posture of a man who believed the world would always bend to him if he just smiled long enough. But today, he did not notice the woman in the dark navy suit who sat quietly in the second row, her hands folded, her eyes following him as he moved through the room. He did not see the folder resting on her lap, did not see the calm in her breathing, the stillness in her posture that hid a storm waiting to be unleashed. Lindsey Graham leaned into the mic and cleared his throat, the way politicians do when they know every camera in the room is about to catch their words. The red lights blinked, waiting. "Ladies and gentlemen," he started, his voice smooth, with that southern warmth he always used, the kind that made people think he was being polite even when he wasn't. "We're here today to talk about something fundamental, something sacred, the integrity of our elections." He paused, letting the words hang there, letting them drift around the humid room, toward the cameras, the reporters, the folks scrolling on their phones, half listening. Jasmine Crockett didn't take her eyes off him. She didn't look down. She didn't fidget. She just sat there, quiet, calm, taking in every single word. Graham kept going, rolling out lines he'd said 100 times before, like it was muscle memory. "In South Carolina, we take our elections seriously," he said, tapping the table with 2 fingers. "We believe every eligible voter should have the right to vote, and every ineligible vote takes away from those who follow the law." A few people nodded. Some took notes. Others didn't even look up from their phones. But Jasmine listened, because behind every polished sentence, she heard what it meant for people back in Texas, the families who stood in the heat for hours just to cast a ballot, the grandparents turned away over paperwork, the students who'd get their registrations questioned, the neighborhoods that would lose polling places. Graham glanced around the room, giving reporters that look they loved, the leader defending democracy look. Then he saw Jasmine. He didn't really see her, just the navy suit, the calm posture, the quiet eyes. To him, she was just another young rep, another newbie who would learn how things work eventually. and he gave her that smile, the one that said, "Welcome to the game, sweetheart." Jasmine took a slow breath. She'd seen that look before, from men who thought they could talk down to her, in courtrooms, in offices, in meetings where she was the only one in the room fighting for people who had no one else. She let him keep talking. Graham flipped a page in his notes and looked at her like he was about to teach her something. Sometimes it's important for those who are new to listen, to learn, to understand there's more to this than hashtags and headlines. People shifted in their seats, phones tilted toward Jasmine, ready to catch her reaction. She didn't move, didn't blink, just kept looking at him, steady, calm. Her fingers found the zipper on her bag, tracing it lightly. Her heartbeat was steady. She waited. When Graham finished, he looked up, letting that smile spread again. "And now," he said with fake courtesy, "I'd like to invite Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas to share her perspective." He leaned back, hands folded, acting like the conversation was his to control. All eyes turned to Jasmine. Cameras adjusted, mics clicked on. Everyone was waiting. Jasmine lifted her head and looked right at Graham. She leaned forward, grabbed her bag, unzipped it, and pulled out a folder. You could hear the quiet rustle of paper as she opened it, laying it flat on the table. She didn't flinch. She didn't rush. She just looked at him, calm and ready. And then she started to speak. Jasmine didn't rush. She let the room settle, let the quiet sink in, let every camera find her face before she even opened her mouth. Then she looked up, right at Lindsey Graham, and her voice came out calm, clear, no shake, no hesitation. "Thank you, Senator Graham, for giving me the floor." Her eyes didn't leave him, not for a second. "I came here today because voting isn't just policy for me. It's not a talking point. It's personal. It's the stories of people who call my office crying because they got turned away at the polls after waiting 3 hours in the Texas heat. It's the grandparents who bring folding chairs because they know they'll be waiting all day just to exercise a right you and I both swore an oath to protect." She flipped open the folder, pulling out the first sheet of paper, holding it up just enough for the cameras to catch it. "This," she said, "is the record of polling locations closed in majority black and brown neighborhoods in my district over the last 5 years." Her voice didn't rise. She wasn't yelling. She didn't need to. "You talk about election integrity, Senator. I'm talking about the integrity of a grandmother's right to vote without having to crawl to the front of the line because she physically can't stand any longer." Graham shifted in his seat, trying to keep the easy smile on his face. Jasmine saw it. She didn't stop. "You said people who are new should listen," Jasmine continued, her tone steady, measured, almost gentle. "Well, let me tell you what I've been listening to since I got here. Stories of people begging us to make voting easier, not harder. And what I've been learning? I've been learning that people in power will do anything to keep it, even if it means silencing the people who put them there." She set the paper down, reaching for the next one. "Here's the data showing how these so-called integrity laws are cutting voter participation in minority communities by double digits. Here's the report from nonpartisan watchdogs calling these laws what they are, voter suppression." She didn't look down at her notes once. She didn't need to. "Senator, you said hashtags and headlines don't matter, and you're right. They don't change lives. But you know what does? Laws. And the laws you're pushing for in South Carolina, they're not protecting votes. They're protecting power." A hush fell over the room, thicker than the Charleston heat pressing against the windows. Reporters stopped typing. Staffers stopped whispering. Even the cameras seemed to lean in. Jasmine let the silence hang, let the weight of her words settle on Graham's shoulders. And then she added, "And before you call me young lady or sweetheart, let me remind you, I'm Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, elected by the people, to fight for the people. And that's exactly what I'm doing here." Graham's jaw tightened, just for a split second, but it was enough for everyone to see. Jasmine closed the folder gently, her eyes still locked on him. She wasn't done, but she didn't need to keep talking, because in that moment, everyone in that room, and everyone who would see the clip later knew the power had just shifted. For a moment, Lindsey Graham didn't know what to say. The room was too quiet, the cameras too close, the weight of Jasmine's words hanging over him like a storm cloud he didn't see coming. He tried to laugh it off, letting out a quick chuckle, tapping his pen on the desk. "Well," he started, clearing his throat, "Congresswoman Crockett, I appreciate your passion on these issues, truly, but I think you're oversimplifying a very complex topic." The fake smile slipped back onto his face, but it didn't reach his eyes this time. "See, voting laws, federalism, election security, these aren't as black and white as you're making them out to be. You'll learn that in time." He leaned back, folding his arms, trying to reclaim the room. But Jasmine didn't blink. She opened her folder again, calmly sliding out another document and holding it up just enough for the cameras to catch. "This," she said, her voice still calm, "is a letter from the Department of Justice detailing how your proposed legislation will disproportionately impact minority voters in South Carolina." She placed it on the table in front of him, sliding it across the polished wood. "You can call it complex, Senator, but that complexity doesn't change the facts. Voter suppression is still voter suppression, no matter how many pages of legal language you hide it in." Graham's fingers drummed on the table, his eyes flicking toward the cameras before coming back to Jasmine. "I think you're misunderstanding the intent behind this legislation," he said, his voice tighter now, the smooth edge slipping. "It's about making sure every legal vote counts." Jasmine's eyebrow lifted, just barely. "Intent doesn't outweigh impact, Senator," she replied, her tone like steel wrapped in velvet. "And if your intent truly is to protect voting rights, then why do these laws consistently make it harder for the same communities to vote over and over again?" Graham opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The silence was louder than any shout. You could feel the shift in the room. Staffers exchanged glances. Reporters adjusted their cameras, leaning in, sensing the moment becoming something bigger than a routine hearing. Even Graham's own aides were looking down, pretending to check their notes. Jasmine leaned back slightly, giving him space to respond, her eyes never leaving his. But Graham was scrambling. He reached for another note, flipping the page, searching for a line, a comeback, anything. "Well, Congresswoman," he finally managed, "when you've spent as many years in public service as I have, you'll understand that real change takes time, and it requires working within the system." Jasmine leaned forward, cutting him off gently but firmly. "With all due respect, Senator, people have been waiting long enough. Voters don't have the luxury of waiting another decade for you to figure out how to protect their rights. They're losing them now." Graham's jaw tightened again, his pen tapping faster. He looked like a man realizing, too late, that he'd walked into a fight he wasn't prepared for. Jasmine opened the folder once more, pulling out a final sheet. She held it up, letting the cameras catch the seal on the top of the page. "This is a list of cases I've personally argued in court to defend the right to vote," she said, her voice clear, even, unshakable. "So while you've been talking about the Constitution, I've been using it." She placed the paper down in front of her, folding her hands on top of it, her gaze steady. The room was so quiet, you could hear the faint buzz of a camera lens refocusing. And in that silence, Lindsey Graham realized he was no longer the one in control. Lindsey Graham's fingers tapped faster now, the rhythm uneven, a small tell that his confidence was slipping. He tried to force a smile, but it looked tight, uncomfortable. "Congresswoman Crockett, I appreciate your commitment, I really do," he said, his voice carrying a forced calm. "But you've got to understand, sweetheart, there's a lot more to this than you realize." The word hung in the air like a slap. Sweetheart. You could see it register, second by second, row by row. A reporter's eyes went wide. A staffer's pen stopped mid-note. Even the cameraman shifted, the lens adjusting, focusing tighter on Jasmine's face. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She just let it sit there, heavy, uncomfortable, letting him feel every ounce of the mistake he had just made. When Jasmine finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost too soft for the mic, but the room was so silent that every syllable landed like a drumbeat. Senator Graham, she said, her eyes locked on his. I am not your sweetheart. She leaned in just slightly, her posture controlled, calm, deadly focused. I am Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, elected by the people of Texas to fight for their rights, to speak for those who can't be here, and to make sure that their voices are heard. Graham's face flushed, a deep red climbing from his neck to his cheeks. His mouth opened, searching for words, but Jasmine didn't give him the chance. And let me be clear, she continued, her voice gaining strength. If you think calling me sweetheart will diminish the truth I brought into this room today, you are mistaken. You could hear the air conditioning click on, the hum filling the room like background noise as everyone held their breath. Reporters were already pulling out their phones under the table, texting editors. Staffers were exchanging glances, some nodding, some looking away, pretending to read their notes. Graham shifted again, trying to find his smile, but it wouldn't come back. Jasmine reached into her folder one last time, pulling out a single sheet of paper. She slid it across the table toward him. This is a report showing how voter ID laws in states like South Carolina disproportionately affect black voters, elderly voters, and working-class voters. It's not about politics, Senator. It's about people. Her hand rested on the folder, steady, unshaking. She leaned back in her chair, letting the silence fill the space he once commanded. Graham tried to clear his throat again, but his voice cracked. Well, I didn't mean any disrespect, Congresswoman, he stammered, his usual calm replaced with visible discomfort. It's a figure of speech. Jasmine raised an eyebrow, just enough for the cameras to catch it. Respect isn't a figure of speech, Senator, she replied, her voice even, her eyes locked on his. It's a choice. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved, no one spoke. And in that moment, Lindsey Graham realized that he wasn't just losing control of the conversation, he was losing the room. Jasmine let the silence work. She didn't rush to fill it, didn't soften the moment, didn't let him off the hook. She just watched him, calm, steady, letting everyone in the room feel the discomfort Graham had created with a single word. Finally, she reached back into her folder, pulling out a thicker stack of papers and set them on the table with a quiet thud that felt louder than any shout. Since we're talking about respect, Senator, she said, her voice measured, let's talk about your record. Graham shifted in his seat, trying to keep his face neutral, but his eyes betrayed him, flicking down at the stack of papers like they were a threat he didn't know how to handle. These are your votes, Senator, Jasmine continued, flipping the first page over slowly. Votes against the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, votes against expanding voter access, votes against protections for people with disabilities who just want to cast their ballot. She flipped another page, the sound crisp in the silent room. You say voting integrity matters to you, but when the opportunity came to strengthen that integrity for all voters, you voted no, again and again. Graham opened his mouth, his hands lifting slightly as if to gesture, but Jasmine kept going. You talk about federalism and states' rights, but your state has taken billions in federal aid when it's convenient. Disaster relief, highway funding, agricultural subsidies. Federal money is fine when it serves your interests, but when it comes to protecting voting rights, suddenly you want to wash your hands of responsibility. The words hit like steady, controlled strikes, each one exposing the cracks in his carefully maintained image. Graham's face was red again, his fingers drumming, his mouth opening and closing without words. And let's not forget, Jasmine continued, her voice firm but never shouting, in 2016, you called President Trump a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot. Your words, Senator, not mine. But the moment he won, you fell in line. She paused, letting that one settle. You talk about experience like it's the same as wisdom. But real wisdom, Senator, is standing up for what's right even when it's hard, not bending with the political wind whenever it suits you. For a moment, the room felt like it stopped breathing. The staffers weren't pretending to check their notes anymore. Reporters were openly filming, some with their mouths slightly open, as if realizing they were witnessing a moment that would replay on every platform before the day was over. Even Graham's aides looked frozen, their eyes darting between him and Jasmine. Jasmine leaned forward, resting her hands on the folder, her eyes locked on Graham. You called me sweetheart, she said quietly, and tried to dismiss my expertise, my experience, my voice. She leaned back, her posture relaxed, but her eyes were sharp, cutting. I don't need your respect, Senator. I'm here to earn it from the people who sent me here. But let me be clear, I will not allow you or anyone else to silence the voices I represent. There was a moment, a fraction of a second, where no one moved, and then, quietly at first, someone clapped. Another person joined in, then another, and then the room was filled with the sound of applause, rising, echoing against the high ceilings of the chamber, washing over Graham as he sat there, unable to hide the defeat in his eyes. Jasmine didn't smile, she didn't raise her hands. She just sat there, letting the applause roll, letting the cameras capture the moment. Because this wasn't about her. It was about every voter who had been told to wait, to be quiet, to be patient, while their rights were stripped away piece by piece. It was about every person who had been called sweetheart in a meeting, in a courtroom, in a hearing, and told they didn't know enough, weren't old enough, weren't experienced enough. And in that room, in that moment, they all won. It didn't take long. Before Jasmine had even gathered her papers, the clips were already online. Someone in the room had filmed the exact moment Graham called her sweetheart. The exact moment she laid down the documents, looked him in the eye, and dismantled every excuse he tried to hide behind. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere. On Twitter, it was captioned, "Lindsey Graham calls Rep. Jasmine Crockett sweetheart and gets destroyed on live TV." On TikTok, it was remixed with captions like, "This is how you handle condescension. Jasmine Crockett, remember the name?" Millions watched as Graham's smirk faded, as Jasmine calmly spoke truth after truth, as the silence in that Senate room turned into a roar online. Cable news grabbed it next. CNN opened their hour with "Senior Senator humiliated after disrespecting Congresswoman Crockett." MSNBC called it "A new voice demands respect and wins." Even Fox News, trying to spin it, couldn't deny what had happened. They played the clip over and over, their anchors pausing, awkward, as they tried to defend Graham's word choice, but the image was undeniable. Jasmine, calm, confident, unshakable. Graham, fumbling, flustered, silent. Overnight, sweetheart started trending for all the wrong reasons. People were sharing their own stories. Young women in law firms, black women in boardrooms, students raising their hands in classrooms, only to be ignored. They all saw themselves in Jasmine standing there, refusing to shrink, refusing to smile and let it pass. In South Carolina, local papers ran headlines, "Graham's comments spark backlash. Calls for apology grow after Crockett confrontation." Constituents who had supported him for years started questioning. Older voters who had always trusted Graham were uncomfortable with what they saw. Younger voters were angry. Donors called staffers asking what happened. Graham tried to issue a statement saying, "My words were taken out of context. I have the utmost respect for Congresswoman Crockett." But it was too late. The video was the context. Meanwhile, Jasmine's phone was blowing up. Messages from voters, colleagues, strangers. "Thank you. You spoke for all of us. Never let them talk down to you." Interviews flooded in. CNN, MSNBC, NPR. Even late-night shows wanted her. But when she sat down in front of the cameras, Jasmine didn't make it about herself. She talked about Texas voters waiting in line for hours. She talked about disabled voters being turned away. She talked about the right to vote, the real reason she was there. "Look," she told an interviewer, calm and clear, "this isn't about me versus Senator Graham. This is about who we listen to in this country. Do we listen to the people waiting in line for 8 hours to vote? Or do we listen to politicians who think it's okay to call a colleague sweetheart when they get uncomfortable with the truth?" Clips of her interviews went just as viral. Young women stitched them on TikTok, pointing to Jasmine's composure as the standard. Community organizers shared them, using her words to encourage voter registration. Law students sent the clips to each other, calling it a masterclass in composure under pressure. In offices, in classrooms, in living rooms, people talked about it, not just the sweetheart moment, but how Jasmine handled it, how she stayed calm, how she stayed focused, how she turned a moment of disrespect into a moment of power. And Lindsey Graham? He tried to act like it was nothing. He showed up on conservative radio joking that people are too sensitive these days, but the laugh didn't sound right. He was asked about it at town halls. He dodged the questions. He avoided eye contact. For the first time in a long time, he looked small. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't post memes or take victory laps. She kept talking about voting rights, kept talking about people, because she knew it wasn't about one man's disrespectful word. It was about every single voter who needed someone to stand up for them, to refuse to be silenced, to refuse to be dismissed, no matter who tried. And across the country, people were listening. The days after the clip went viral felt different. People weren't just watching Jasmine anymore. They were listening. Young voters who had never paid attention to a Senate hearing were sharing her words on their stories. Church groups in Texas were replaying her speech during community meetings, reminding people why their vote mattered. In college classrooms, professors paused lectures to play the clip, telling students, "This is how you handle disrespect while staying on message." Jasmine didn't waste the moment. She knew virality was temporary if you didn't turn it into action. She started hosting town halls across Texas, packing community centers with people hungry to talk about voting rights. At each event, she would stand there, no teleprompter, no frills, just her voice filling the room. "Y'all saw what happened," she'd say, letting the laughter ripple through the crowd. "But this isn't about me and a senator who thought he could silence me with one word. This is about you, your right to vote, your voice." People lined up to talk to her afterward, single mothers who brought their kids with them, elderly voters who told her about the last election when they couldn't stand in line that long, college students who said they felt invisible until they saw her speak. Every story fueled her. Every handshake reminded her why she was in Congress in the first place. Meanwhile, Lindsey Graham's staff was in full damage control. They released carefully worded statements about how the senator respects all his colleagues. They tried to push the narrative that it was just a misunderstanding, but the internet wasn't buying it. Every time they tried to move on, the clip would resurface, reminding everyone exactly what was said, exactly how it felt. Late-night hosts roasted Graham. They played the clip, paused it, zoomed in on his face as Jasmine calmly laid out the facts. Audiences laughed, but it wasn't just comedy. It was accountability. Behind the scenes, Graham's donors were uneasy. They didn't like the optics. They didn't like the polling data showing a sharp dip in his approval ratings among women and young voters. In private meetings, Graham was told to fix it, but he couldn't, because this wasn't a small gaffe. It was a moment that exposed everything people were tired of: the condescension, the dismissal, the smug assumption that experience was more important than competence. Meanwhile, Jasmine was building. She launched a campaign to register voters, using the momentum to bring in volunteers across Texas and beyond. They called it Respect the Vote. Flyers with her image standing in front of Graham, papers in hand, eyes steady, became a symbol. Not of her, but of them. Of every person who had ever been told to wait their turn. Of every voter who had been turned away. Of every woman who had been called sweetheart in a room where she was the most qualified person there. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine took the movement national. She appeared on national podcasts, breaking down voting rights in clear, direct language people understood. She worked with organizers in Georgia, in Arizona, in Wisconsin, places where voting was becoming harder, not easier. She testified before other committees, refusing to let the moment with Graham define her, using it instead as a springboard. Reporters tried to get her to talk about Graham, to drag him again, to recreate the viral moment, but she wouldn't take the bait. "He's not the story," she told one reporter. "The voters are." And yet, the impact on Graham was undeniable. At public events, people shouted, "Respect her," whenever he tried to speak. During interviews, when he made a dismissive comment, anchors would raise an eyebrow, reminding him silently of the moment he lost the room. Even his colleagues started to keep a polite distance, not wanting to get caught in the crossfire if he made another mistake. One night, Jasmine was leaving a town hall in Dallas, her team packing up flyers and folding chairs. An older woman approached her, moving slowly with a cane, her eyes bright. "Baby, I saw what you did," she said, gripping Jasmine's hand. "Don't you let them shut you up. You keep going." Jasmine squeezed her hand back. "Yes, ma'am," she said softly. "We're just getting started." Because Jasmine knew this wasn't about a viral clip. It wasn't about one man's disrespect. It was about power. Who held it? Who they listened to? Who they dismissed? And who would stand up, calmly, unshaken, and say, "No, not today." The clip didn't fade like others did. It became something bigger. High school debate teams used Jasmine's response as a case study in poise under pressure. Law schools played it during orientation. Professors pausing at the moment, she corrected Graham to teach about composure, about holding the room without raising your voice. Women's leadership conferences invited Jasmine to speak, her presence alone electrifying the room before she even opened her mouth. She didn't change. She showed up in her dark suits, hair pulled back, folder in hand, ready to speak with facts, not just feelings. Ready to fight, not for herself, but for the people who trusted her to be their voice. Meanwhile, Lindsey Graham couldn't shake it off. Every interview, every appearance, the question would come. "Do you regret calling Congresswoman Crockett sweetheart?" He'd smile, the old politician's smile, trying to pivot, to laugh it off. But the laugh didn't land, because people weren't laughing with him anymore. They were remembering that moment he lost control, the moment he revealed who he really was under the polished lines and practiced smiles. Back in South Carolina, it started showing up in the numbers. Women voters who once gave him the benefit of the doubt started pulling away. Young voters saw the clip, shook their heads, and registered to vote, determined to never let that kind of power go unchecked. Donors called his staff, asking why he couldn't just apologize, why he couldn't just own it. But he didn't, and it cost him. Jasmine kept moving. She co-sponsored new voting rights legislation, standing on the House floor, reminding her colleagues why it mattered. She built coalitions across states, organizing voter education drives. She kept showing up in communities big and small, reminding people that the right to vote was something worth fighting for. 1 year after the clip went viral, Jasmine stood in front of a packed auditorium in Houston. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. "How did you stay so calm when he called you that?" she asked. Jasmine smiled, taking a breath before she answered. "Because it wasn't about him," she said softly, "and it wasn't about me." She looked around the room, meeting their eyes one by one. "It was about all of you. About every person who's been talked down to, disrespected, told to wait their turn, while the people in power kept taking more. I stayed calm because I knew in that moment I wasn't alone." The room erupted in applause, but Jasmine just nodded, letting it wash over her, letting it belong to them. Lindsey Graham would go on to run for re-election, but the clip followed him everywhere. It played in attack ads. It was quoted in debates. It was brought up in town halls by voters who were tired of being talked down to. He lost support he thought was locked in. He lost respect he thought was guaranteed. And deep down, he knew why. Jasmine, meanwhile, was just getting started. She turned that moment into a movement. She turned disrespect into momentum. She turned a single word into a rallying cry for a generation that refused to wait, refused to be quiet, refused to be silenced. And maybe that's the real lesson. Respect isn't given because of your title. It's earned by your actions. And power isn't about who can talk the loudest or who's been in the room the longest. It's about who's willing to stand up, stay steady, and speak the truth, even when it shakes the room. So, if you ever find yourself in a room where someone tries to shut you down, to diminish you, to call you sweetheart, while dismissing your voice, remember Jasmine Crockett. Remember that moment, and remember that you don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to stand. Thank you for listening to this story. If it moved you, if it made you think, if it made you believe that change is possible when we refuse to stay silent, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because we're not done telling these stories, and you're not done making them.